at home at the time.
On the night of September 18th, 2025, police officers in Walnut Creek, California, were dispatched to a quiet suburban home following reports of a disturbance. What they found inside would shock even seasoned investigators. 2 women were dead, a wife and her mother, killed inside a home where 2 young children were sleeping only rooms away. The suspect was already at the scene. And as detectives would soon discover, this was not a sudden act of violence, but the final chapter in a story marked by control, secrecy, and escalation. Walnut Creek is considered one of the safer cities in Northern California. Tree-lined streets, family neighborhoods, good schools. Violent crime here is rare, and when it does occur, it often feels distant, something that happens somewhere else. The home on Kelobra Court looked no different from any other in the area. Inside lived a family that from the outside appeared ordinary. Howard Wang, his wife, Linlin Guo, their twin 8-year-old daughters, and Linlin's mother, Beimin Cheng. 4 adults, 2 children, 1 household. But behind closed doors, investigators say something was deeply wrong. Howard Wang was 43 years old at the time of the killings. To neighbors and acquaintances, he appeared reserved, not particularly social, but not alarming. There were no obvious outward signs that would suggest the level of violence that would later unfold. However, prosecutors would later reveal that Howard's private behavior told a very different story. Court records showed prior incidents involving domestic disputes. In one instance, Howard allegedly made criminal threats toward his wife. In another, he reportedly prevented her from contacting police. These moments, while not widely known at the time, would later become critical in understanding what happened next. Linlin Guo was 37 years old. Friends described her as devoted to her children and family-focused. She lived with her husband and daughters, while also caring for her mother, Beimin Cheng, who resided in the same home. Beimin was a grandmother, someone who had come to support her daughter and help raise the children. Both women would lose their lives inside that house, and neither would have the chance to escape.
Our officers located 2 homicide victims. We conducted a thorough search of the building and the neighborhood. We determined there was no threat to the community.
Cases like this, investigators often look for patterns, and according to prosecutors, the pattern here was one of control. Control over communication, control over movement, control over fear. Domestic violence experts describe this as coercive control, a slow tightening of power that doesn't always involve physical violence at first. Victims may feel isolated, watched, trapped. Leaving becomes complicated, and asking for help can feel dangerous. By the time outside intervention occurs, it is often too late. Shortly before midnight, neighbors on Kelobra Court reported hearing a disturbance. Some described yelling, others described sounds that suggested something was seriously wrong. Police were dispatched to the residence. When officers entered the home, they discovered a horrific scene. Linlin Guo and Beimin Cheng were found inside the house, both suffering fatal stab wounds. There were signs of a violent struggle. Blood evidence indicated the attacks were personal and sustained. Howard Wang was still inside the home when police arrived. He was immediately detained. The couple's twin daughters were also inside the residence. They were physically unharmed. Howard Wang was arrested at the scene. He did not flee. He did not attempt to hide. For investigators, this suggested one of 2 things: either shock or the belief that escape was no longer necessary. Officers transported him to jail, where he was booked on suspicion of murder. As the investigation unfolded, the case would quickly grow more complex. Detectives began reconstructing the hours and days leading up to the killings. They examined phone records, text messages, surveillance footage, and what they uncovered raised new questions. Investigators discovered that Howard Wang was involved in an extramarital relationship, and that relationship would soon become a focal point of the case. Not long after Howard's arrest, police took another person into custody, a woman named Yan Wang, not related by family, despite sharing the last name. According to prosecutors, Yan Wang was romantically involved with Howard. She was accused of entering the home after the murders, of destroying evidence, and of attempting to conceal critical digital information. Cell phones were allegedly damaged or removed. Potential evidence was interfered with. Prosecutors charged her as an accessory after the fact. A judge later denied bail, citing concerns over obstruction and public safety. Howard Wang was formally charged with 2 counts of murder. Because there were multiple victims, prosecutors added special circumstance enhancements. In California, this means that if convicted, the defendant could face life in prison without the possibility of parole. The prosecution also introduced evidence of past domestic violence, not to retry old cases, but to establish a pattern of intimidation, a pattern of control, a pattern that prosecutors argue culminated in murder. One of the most tragic aspects of this case involves the children. 2 8-year-old girls were asleep in the home while their mother and grandmother were killed. They lost both caregivers in a single night, one to violence, the other to the consequences of it. Cases like this leave scars far beyond the courtroom, scars that last for decades. Experts say domestic homicide often follows a predictable trajectory. It begins with control, then isolation, then escalation. When the abuser feels they are losing power, through separation, exposure, or rejection, violence becomes a way to reclaim control. Not all abusive relationships end this way, but when they do, the warning signs are often visible in hindsight. Walnut Creek residents were stunned. This was not the kind of crime they expected in their neighborhood. Vigils were held. Messages of grief filled social media. Many expressed shock that such violence could occur behind what appeared to be a normal family home. Others reflected on how often domestic violence goes unseen. As of now, Howard Wang remains in custody awaiting trial. Yan Wang faces separate charges related to evidence tampering and obstruction. The legal process will determine guilt or innocence, but for the victim's family, the damage is already permanent. 2 women lost their lives in a place meant to offer safety. 2 children lost their mother and grandmother in a single night, and a community was forced to confront a reality that often stays hidden, that the most dangerous threats are sometimes the ones closest to home. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic abuse, help is available. Speaking up can save a life.